8 epic battles that crushed Hitler and his World War II dreams. What if I told you Hitler could have ruled all of Europe, if not for battles like these 8 brutal turning points that shattered his dream of domination? This isn't a video about maps. This is about men, mud, steel, and the moments where history snapped back. In this video, we'll take you from the smoking skies over London, through the frozen trenches outside Moscow, to the very heart of Berlin. These are 8 epic battles that crushed Hitler's dreams and saved the world from a nightmare. So stay tuned till the end of this video, because the final blow to the Nazi regime is one you'll never forget. The Battle of Britain. Summer 1940, France had fallen. The swastika flew over Paris. Britain stood alone. To Hitler, the plan was simple: bomb the RAF into the ground, wipe out their defenses, and then cross the channel. He called it Operation Sea Lion. Wave after wave of Luftwaffe bombers descended upon southern England. But what he didn't expect? Teenagers in Spitfires who refused to give up, radar stations that spotted incoming squadrons before they crossed the coast, a nation led by a bulldog named Churchill. And then came the Blitz, a campaign of terror bombing on London, meant to break British morale. Instead, it forged their resolve. By October, the Luftwaffe was exhausted. Hitler called off the invasion. Britain had survived, and the myth of Nazi invincibility cracked for the first time. The Battle of Moscow. And so came Russia, vast, brutal, unrelenting. The race to Moscow began not with footsteps, but with thunder. But the next battle, it would be personal. June 1941, Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in history, smashed into the Soviet Union. 3 million German soldiers surged eastward, aiming for Moscow. It was blitzkrieg on steroids. Tanks, aircraft, artillery, all rushing east across the vast Russian plains. The Nazis expected the Red Army to crumble. But instead of collapse, they met resistance. Fierce, determined, and everywhere. Soviet troops fought tooth and nail to delay the advance, trading land for time. By September, German forces were just a few hundred kilometers from the Soviet capital. Stalin refused to evacuate. Civilians were mobilized to dig trenches. Schools were closed. Factories were dismantled and moved east, beyond reach of the Luftwaffe. And then came the weather. First, the rains, turning dirt roads into oceans of mud. German trucks and tanks became mired in muck. Supplies stalled. And as autumn slipped into winter, things got worse. Temperatures plunged to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Weapons froze, engines stalled, fingers snapped from frostbite. German troops still wore summer uniforms. In December, the Red Army launched a surprise counteroffensive with fresh troops from Siberia. These soldiers were trained to fight in freezing temperatures, and they pushed the Germans back. Moscow did not fall, it stood defiant. And for the first time in the war, Hitler's juggernaut had been stopped. The legend of Nazi invincibility shattered in the snow. The Battle of Stalingrad, what started as a march for oil, turned into a meat grinder of pride and ruin. Yet while soldiers froze in Russia, the desert winds whispered of another turning point. In the summer of 1942, Hitler turned his attention to the south, to the oil-rich Caucasus, and to the city that bore his enemy's name, Stalingrad. What was supposed to be a strategic victory turned into a grinding death trap. The Luftwaffe bombed the city into a twisted ruin. But instead of clearing the way, it gave Soviet defenders cover. Streets became trenches. Basements became bunkers. Entire buildings changed hands daily. German soldiers fought not just the enemy, but the city itself, stairwell by stairwell, brick by brick. For months, they pushed forward, inch by inch. But Soviet General Chuikov and his men clung on. Reinforcements slipped across the Volga under cover of darkness. Snipers like Vasily Zaitsev turned rubble into deadly traps. Supplies ran low. Morale ran lower. Then, in November, the tables turned. The Soviets launched Operation Uranus, a massive double envelopment targeting the weaker Axis allies flanking the German Sixth Army. It was a trap. Within days, the German army was encircled. Hitler ordered them to stay put. Resupply efforts by air failed miserably. Soldiers starved, frostbite spread, ammunition ran dry. Still, no surrender came, until it was too late. On February 2nd, 1943, Field Marshal Paulus, newly promoted by Hitler, perhaps as a cruel joke, capitulated. Nearly 300,000 men had entered Stalingrad. Fewer than 100,000 limped out. For Hitler, it was a gut punch. For the world, it was proof. The Nazi war machine could bleed. The Battle of El Alamein. From the snows of the steppe to the sands of the Sahara, the tide of war shifted again, and in its wake came steel. Thousands of tanks lining up for history's deadliest showdown. Meanwhile, under the blistering sun of North Africa, the stakes couldn't be higher. Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox, was clawing his way toward the Suez Canal, threatening to sever Britain's vital link to its empire and claim the Middle Eastern oil fields. Enter General Bernard Montgomery. By late October 1942, British and Commonwealth forces had regrouped at El Alamein, Egypt. For days, artillery thundered across the desert. Over 1,000 guns lit up the night as Montgomery launched Operation Lightfoot, a massive offensive to break the Axis line. Engineers risked their lives clearing vast minefields nicknamed the Devil's Garden. The plan? Smash through the German defenses with tanks following narrow paths cleared through sand and shrapnel. The fighting was brutal. Dust storms blinded tank crews. Heat stroke was common, but the Allies kept pressing. Rommel, overstretched and undersupplied, tried to counterattack, but fuel shortages crippled his armor. Reinforcements from Germany were delayed. Supply lines were harassed by Allied air power. There was no saving blow. By early November, it was over. Rommel's Afrika Korps retreated westward. The British had achieved a stunning victory. Churchill later said, "Before Alamein, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we never had a defeat." For Hitler, it was a strategic and psychological loss. The myth of Axis dominance in Africa, gone. And the road to Italy had just opened. The Battle of Kursk. When the dust settled over Kursk, one thing was clear. The East would never be the same, but now the West was about to rise, in full force and fury. By summer 1943, the Nazis were reeling from defeat at Stalingrad, but Hitler, ever defiant, wanted to strike back. His plan? A bold offensive to encircle Soviet forces around the city of Kursk, where a 150-mile bulge jutted into German lines. Operation Citadel would, he hoped, restore momentum, but the Soviets were ready. Thanks to spies and reconnaissance, Stalin knew what was coming. He turned the Kursk salient into a fortress, layered with trenches, bunkers, minefields, barbed wire, and anti-tank defenses. Over 1 million Red Army soldiers waited. On July 5th, the German attack began, and it was ferocious. Over 6,000 tanks rumbled across the fields, making it the largest armored battle in history. Panthers, Tigers, and Ferdinands met T-34s in an apocalyptic showdown. The skies buzzed with dogfights. Artillery lit the plains like hellfire. But progress was slow. German armor kept breaking down. Minefields devastated advancing columns, and the deeper they pushed, the more resistance they met. Then, on July 12th, at Prokhorovka, Soviet and German tanks clashed head-on, a brutal melee of steel and fire. Within days, the German offensive stalled. Then came the Soviet counterpunch. Operation Kutuzov and Operation Rumyantsev followed, smashing the German flanks and forcing a retreat. Hitler called off the attack. Kursk had become a bloodbath and a disaster. From that moment on, the Eastern Front was never the same. The Red Army was done defending. It was time to roll west. D-Day, the Normandy invasion. Steel met sand in Normandy, but even as the Allies pushed inland, Hitler wasn't done. In fact, he had one last card to play, and it came in winter. June 6, 1944, as dawn broke over the stormy English Channel, the largest amphibious invasion in history began. Operation Overlord, the Allied gamble to take back Western Europe, was underway. The Germans knew an invasion was coming, but not where or when. Through a web of deception, fake armies, false radio chatter, and double agents, Hitler had been convinced the landing would happen at Pas de Calais. Normandy, therefore, was lightly defended by comparison. At midnight, Allied paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines, disrupting communication and securing key roads. Then, as the sun rose, over 5,000 ships and 150,000 troops stormed the beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Resistance was fierce, especially at Omaha, where machine gun fire mowed down wave after wave of Americans. But they pushed forward. Rangers scaled cliffs at Pointe du Hoc, engineers cleared obstacles under fire, medics saved lives with nothing but morphine and grit. By nightfall, the Allies had secured a fragile but real foothold in France. Within a week, more than 300,000 troops had landed. By the end of August, Paris was liberated. The Western Front had opened. Hitler now faced a two-front war, and his nightmare had begun. The Battle of the Bulge. The final gamble failed, and as the snow melted, so did Germany's hope. One last battle remained, and it would be fought in the heart of the beast. December 1944. Just when the Allies thought the end was near, Hitler launched one last desperate gamble. His plan, a surprise winter offensive through the Ardennes forest in Belgium and Luxembourg, aiming to split the Allied lines, recapture Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace. It was bold, it was insane, and for a brief moment, it worked. Under cover of snow and fog, 200,000 German troops and 1,000 tanks slammed into unsuspecting American lines. Roads clogged with retreating troops and civilians. Supply lines were cut. Chaos reigned. A huge bulge formed in the Allied front, giving the battle its name. But in Bastogne, a strategic crossroads town, American paratroopers from the 101st Airborne held firm. Surrounded, cold, and low on supplies, they refused to surrender. When the Germans demanded their capitulation, Brigadier General McAuliffe replied with one word: nuts. Meanwhile, General Patton executed a lightning-fast maneuver, turning his army north and punching through German lines to relieve Bastogne. Then the skies cleared, Allied aircraft returned, and the tide turned. By January, the Germans were in full retreat. They had lost over 100,000 men, along with irreplaceable equipment. It was Hitler's final offensive in the West, and it ended in failure. The road to Berlin was now wide open. The Battle of Berlin, spring 1945. Germany was collapsing. From the west, Allied forces were racing through the Rhineland. From the east, the Red Army had crossed the Oder River. At the heart of it all lay Berlin, the shattered capital of the Third Reich. Inside the city, chaos reigned. Hitler, holed up in his underground Führerbunker, issued orders to phantom divisions. Children and old men were handed rifles. Streets were turned into barricades, but it was too late. On April 16, the Soviets launched their final assault. Over 1 million Red Army troops pushed forward, backed by tanks and artillery that thundered day and night. Bridges were blown, whole neighborhoods flattened, the city burned. Fierce house-to-house fighting consumed Berlin. Every corner, every basement became a battlefield. Nazi fanatics fought to the last, but the red tide was unstoppable. On April 30th, 1945, with Soviet forces just a few hundred meters from his bunker, Adolf Hitler took his own life. 1 week later, Germany unconditionally surrendered. The nightmare was over. Berlin had fallen, and with it, the twisted dream of a 1,000-year Reich. Now, these weren't the only battles that brought the Nazis to their knees, but they were the ones that cracked the facade, turned the tide, and broke the myth of invincibility. 8 battles, 8 hammer blows against tyranny. These weren't just victories, they were the moments the world stood up and said, "No more." Hitler thought the world would kneel. Instead, it fought back. Because even the darkest empires can fall, and when people stand together and never give up, they will.